Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today, Connections for All. I'm Jan Short, General Secretary of the National Pensioners Convention, and we have a full agenda. So I'm going to ask Jonathan, first of all, just to give you an understanding of how things are happening and how you can actually converse and give us questions. Jonathan?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Safer, the NPC's Information Officer. We'll start the event with Jan giving an introduction to the event as well as the panelists. We will then run a couple of quick poll questions and move on to the presentations from the panelists. If you do have any questions, you can use the Q&A section on the bottom. So please type any questions and let us know, and we'll try and get them answered throughout as we go along, and further on after the presentations we will have the Q&A session. We'll then have a couple more polls before the final summaries from the panel and from Jan. So I will now pass you over to Jan for an introduction and we can get underway. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. Actually, today is National Dignity Day, and normally we would be going out in the regions around doing presentations to people. And Dignity Day is about celebrating the various contributions that older people make to society. And it also is about us challenging those things that impact really adversely on older people. So we're here today to look at digital inclusion and exclusion on Dignity Day. So if you look at COVID pandemic, it's shown how valuable the internet and online apps such as House Party, Skype, Zoom, and others are helping older people to stay in touch with family while they're shielded at home. However, the NPC believes many older people are getting left behind in the digital first age. They are often digitally excluded, either because they don't know how to use, or they don't have, or can't afford the broadband and the digital devices, like laptops, tablets, or smartphones, to get online. Research done by our own Digital Working Party found that well over half of our respondents who were not online lacked knowledge or lack of confidence as a reason for not engaging. However, many of them said they might be interested in going online if they had the resources and the training. So this NPC Connections for All webinar is the first of many discussions on this topic. And it marks the launch of the first part of the NPC's campaign to end digital poverty and exclusion. Our aim is to promote digital inclusion for older people through training and access to free broadband and to digital services. But we are also concerned to discuss how the digital first agenda of many businesses, utility companies, banks, and even GP practices, and an apparent move towards a cashless society, is seriously disadvantaging our oldest and most vulnerable. We strongly feel choice in communication is paramount for us all, whether it's through the internet, the telephone, or the post. In this webinar, the NPC will be asking our panelists about these issues and if enough is being done to keep older people in the loop so they can stay safe and connected, whether they are on the internet or not. We'll be putting questions from NPC members to each panelist, and webinar audience members can pose questions through the chat facility, as Jonathan has explained. Now, Jonathan, we're going to go to the first poll, I believe. It will come up on your screen. There are multiple choices, and you can tick those that are relevant to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to launch the first poll. And it is, what in your view is the main reason for older people not going online? So this is a multiple choice. You can add more than one option. and we'll give you a minute or so to vote, and then we'll go on to the second poll. Okay, so let's end the poll there, and I'll just share the results with you. So 71% agreed that it's because of affordability of laptops, tablets, phone contracts and broadband. 79% a lack of knowledge and training of how to use computer or internet. Fears over defrauding or being scammed, 52%. Genuinely not interested, 21%. And 4% for other. If we go on to the next poll. And this is, will you be completing your online, your census form online on March the 21st? So this is a simple single answer, yes, no, undecided. And we'll just give you a minute or so to let us know that. And then we will pass you back to Jan. Okay, let's end it there. Just share the results with you. So 74% of you said yes, you would be completing it online. 7% no, and 18% undecided. Okay. So Jan, if I can hand it back to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's very interesting, actually. The census question is a big one for us. It only recently came about that we found out that the census this year was going to be online. And we're quite understanding of why, because people haven't been able to work in their offices. They haven't been able to get the print of the form rolled out and posted out to people. And there was an issue about whether the census should actually be deferred until 2022, but the government decided no, they needed that data now. So what will happen is, if you haven't actually completed your census form on the 21st of March, which is the day that you all have to say where you are, if you haven't done that online, it will be picked up by the department, and you will get a visit from a support officer who will come with a form to your door. They will not enter the house. They will ask you the questions that you need to answer on your doorstep to keep you safe, which is fine, unless it's a really freezing cold day like today and I'm standing in my doorway shivering with cold. So that is the two ways now that you can take part in the census this year, which is significantly different than everybody getting a form to fill in and pop in an envelope and send back. So that's the latest that we have on census. If it changes, which I doubt, we will keep you up to date. Okay. Okay. Also with the census, we're not sure what kind of data that will show being asked on the doorstep rather than on the day online. If you can remember where you were on the 1st of March, if they come and see you at the end of March, good. If not, that's a bit of a problem. Right, okay. I'd like now to introduce members of our panel so that you know who they are before we ask them to speak to you. We have Helena Herclots, who is the Older People's Commissioner for Wales. Good morning, Helen. Helen Milner, who is the Chief Executive of the Good Things Foundation. Hello, Helen. Jenny Haskey and Brian Ross Atkinson. Jenny is the Chief Executive of Citizens Online, and Brian, I believe, is a project worker. Then we have Roger Jenkins, who's a National Officer for GMB. Last but by no means least, Genevieve Lloyd, who's a campaign manager for Which. Now, Which does an awful lot of good work on behalf of consumers, so it'd be interesting to see what they think about the questions we've got here. Right, moving swiftly on, if I could ask Helena Herclots to begin her presentation, please, Helena.
Thanks very much, Jan, and good morning, everyone. It's great to join you, particularly on this Dignity Action Day. So my name's Helena Herclots. I'm the Older People's Commissioner for Wales. This is an independent role set out in legislation, and my role is to protect and promote the rights of all older people in Wales. In the legislation that set up my role, it defines older people as everyone over the age of 60. So during this pandemic, it's been a particularly challenging time for all of us, and a particular time where my work in protecting older people's rights has very much been to the fore. So looking at the issue of digital inclusion, for me, this is an issue of rights. We know how important being digitally included has been over the last few months in particular. It's enabled us to be in touch with people, to see people, to hold people close, even though we might be miles and miles apart. But for those who are digitally excluded, I think it's increased inequalities. It's threatened people's rights. And it's shown that the issue of digital inclusion isn't just about something that's nice to do or good to have. It's a fundamental right for all of us. It's increasingly difficult to be full citizens without being digitally included. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Wales to encourage people to get online and support people to do that. And also some of the things I'm doing as Commissioner to make sure that not being digitally included does not disadvantage you in your everyday life. So looking at some of the things that have been happening for older people, one of the things we've found is that many older people didn't get digitally included at home. They did it through clubs or organisations, and the way in which people might have stayed online has been by going to their local libraries or local clubs to use computers. So there's one thing about having the skills to use digital, but there's also another issue and another challenge, particularly now, about being able to do that and have the location to do it. So the closure of clubs and of libraries has had another big effect on people's digital inclusion. We know also that the issue of poverty is a significant one, and as we saw in the poll just now, a significant barrier. On the other hand, the pandemic has led to more older people going online. One of the things I do as Commissioner is I spend quite a lot of my time going out and about and meeting older people throughout Wales. Now, of course, I've not been able to do that in lockdown, so we've done it through Zoom and other means. And so many older people have come to that for the first time and have realised and have found it incredibly useful for staying in touch. So we should use this dreadful crisis to really power forward people's digital inclusion. So some of the things that we've been doing here in Wales. We have work going on that's supported by Welsh Government under the Digital Communities Wales Digital Confidence, Health and Wellbeing programme. This is a government-funded programme bringing together the Wales Cooperative Centre, the Good Things Foundation and Swansea University, who are providing some academic support to the work. And at the start of the pandemic, the focus was very much on making sure that people living and working in care homes could communicate through digital means. So that included residents being able to stay in touch with family and friends, but also making sure that staff could help residents to get in touch with the NHS video consulting service. So we know that health professionals have not been going to care homes as much, and video consultations have been incredibly important. So there's a big programme of work with support from Welsh Government to get tablets to care homes, but also training and support to try and make sure that that could happen. One of the things I did as Commissioner through some of the early months when the situation in care homes was so distressing was I used digital to be able to speak directly to residents in some care homes. So I remember on one occasion doing a Zoom call, and they put the laptop on the sort of tea trolley, and I was wheeled around to meet residents virtually. And it was very powerful, actually, to suddenly be in that care home and to be talking directly with residents. So we've used digital, haven't we, in so many ways to try and keep that connection going. So that Digital Communities Wales programme has been really important and continues to be. And there's a number of other things that we've been doing as well. So developing digital champions, so working with staff in the third sector and health and social care organisations who are trained by Digital Communities Wales so they can pass on their skills and services to users. So this is really trying to unlock all the community spirit that there is, all the volunteering, to enable people to provide that training and support. And that's also led to a programme called Digital Companions and Digital Buddies, where people are sharing their digital skills and also giving people confidence. I mean, I know I still get slightly concerned if I do something wrong online or something, I'm not quite sure what to do. Sometimes you just need someone who can give you the time to find your way through something and give you that confidence. So that programme has been really important, along with a programme called Digital Heroes, which has particularly looked at intergenerational connections. So intergenerational initiatives with school children, sharing their digital skills with people living in care homes and other older people as well. And in fact, digital is a way of helping us really develop that intergenerational learning and intergenerational solidarity, which is important for the sharing of digital skills, but actually will be incredibly important as we transition through and beyond this pandemic. Then more recently, in October last year, a new alliance was set up in Wales called the Digital Inclusion Alliance. And this is really positive. It's bringing together the public sector, third sector, private sector organisations to work together to promote digital inclusion activity across Wales and to coordinate that activity. And that's got a huge amount of support and is really, if you like, trying to be a movement for change in Wales to do all that is possible to bring people into the digital world if they can be. So some positive work going on, but I want to conclude really just by touching also on the issue of people who are not online, because this is also fundamentally an issue of rights. For many years ahead of us, there will be many people who are not online, either because they don't have the skills or confidence, or because affordability is an issue. In Wales, 41% of people over the age of 75 are still not online, for example. So we need to make sure that if you are not online, you are not disadvantaged. And I think we've seen during the pandemic that actually you are disadvantaged. It may be things like not being able to do online shopping or ordering, but also getting access to crucial information about what's happening. If you think about how much we all rely on information from digital sources, as well as from TV and radio, almost to triangulate the information that we're getting so we understand what's happening. So for me, this is an issue of rights on two levels. One, I think we need to make digital inclusion much more of a right, that we need to recognise that being digitally connected is part of the necessary infrastructure in the same way it is in terms of being able to get electricity or gas. It's that important. But also that we need to make sure that public bodies and services are still communicating and engaging with people in other ways. We must not get to a point whereby the only way in which you can be a full citizen is being by digitally included. And one of the things I will be doing as the Older People's Commissioner in Wales is holding public bodies to account on that issue, to make sure that they continue to provide information, opportunities to engage and to have your voice heard if you are not online. And these things relate to dignity, to the Dignity Action Day, because it's very difficult to have dignity in your life if you feel you're not heard or you're excluded. So it's a really good day to be discussing together these important issues. And I really look forward to listening to the other speakers and to the questions. So thank you very much and look forward to the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Helena. That is really very comprehensive. I'm just going to bring you up to date with some of the messages we've been getting. In terms of the census form, I think it is our friend James Tony Garner from Eastern Region, who is always a mine of information. Tony says they had a presentation in their parish from the Census Office, and they have been told that we all get a letter in advance of the 21st of March, telling us how it will be. There will be, you can ask questions online. If you're going to do an online questionnaire and you get a bit stuck, apparently there's a chat line that you can get into and get some help. There will also be a phone number that you can phone so that you can ask somebody to talk you through your form. For rural areas, they will be getting paper first, and other areas, if they can manage, we should all get a paper form to fill in. We wait and see, but that's good news. Thank you, Tony, as always. And there was a question, Helen, I wonder if you might answer, and we might ask the same question of other people coming up. We've had an issue around schools being closed and pupils not having access to laptops and computers and the internet to do their schoolwork. And yet a lot of businesses have come together and managed to either fundraise for or actually pay for and donate to schools the laptops and the access to internet that low-income families can't afford to pay. And the question is, would they be able to extend that goodwill to pensioners? Do you think that's possible?
Well, I think it's a really good idea, actually, that we think about everyone in our communities that's not able to access the internet. It's a key issue, isn't it, for school children who are struggling to learn at the moment. So, I'm really supportive of the fact that people are doing all they can to help children in that situation. But this is an issue that is across all generations, actually. And I think, so many people probably have more devices actually that they need at the moment, or they might be upgrading their laptop and things. So finding ways in which those can be either loaned or delivered to people, I think would be really helpful. And I know there has been work done, and I'm sure Helen from the Good Things Foundation might talk about the digital devices work that's been done on that. The other key issue, though, is about that support and training and confidence building. So it's also about the personal contact to help people get used to going online, making sure people are aware of the kind of scams that might be there as well, so they can get online safely. So it is partly about the kit, but it's massively about the human contact as well.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. That's really helpful. And like I say, you might ask that same question of other panelists, so be ready. Thank you very much, Helena. Next on our agenda, Helen Milner, who's the Chief Executive of the Good Things Foundation. Good morning, Helen. Would you like to start your presentation?
Yeah, let me share my screen, demonstrate whether or not I'm digitally included or not. It says it's disabled participant screen sharing, so if Jonathan could do that, that would be great. So as Jan said, I'm the Chief Exec of the Good Things Foundation. We're a national, across the whole of the UK organisation. Sorry, am I going can I share my screen? Oh, there we go. Okay, you're sharing for me. Great, lovely. We've been lobbying the government around what we're calling for is 100% digitally included nation, and we're calling that Fix the Digital Divide. So, I think there's definitely something that I've already thought of this morning. We should be coming together with all of our campaigning to really keep on knocking on that door. And it is something that we have, we are talking to Caroline Dinenage, she's the Digital Inclusion Minister. And I do think it is a good time because of so many people having been exacerbated their suffering because of digital exclusion. So my next slide shows the partners that we work with. So at Good Things Foundation, our vision is a world where everyone benefits through digital, and we work in partnership. So we have a national partnership of online centres. So they're those little dots all over the UK. And we work with them in partnership to deliver programs. In the last 10 years, together we've supported over 3 million people. So we like to talk about the deep impact, people being happier, healthier and better off through being supported. But all of those other logos on that screen are the people that we work with in order to make that happen. And one, so obviously companies like Google or BT, and obviously a range of different government departments, but you mentioned the census already. So we also are working with the ONS in England and Wales. So one other thing that you will have available to you during the census, the whole of that census period, are places to go to. So 400 to 500 local places. So if you would like to give it a go online, but don't feel confident doing it on your own, you can go and get support. And of course, they've all got PPE and everything. So the next slide shows that the digital divide is absolutely that. It's this isn't my phrase, but I like it. It's a digital chasm. So you can see there the 9 million people on the one side who can't use the internet without any help, and the 27.6 million people on the other side who are highly engaged. And of course, COVID has exposed and exacerbated that. So on this infographic that we've done for 2020, it shows all of those stats and facts about who's offline, including the north-south divide and the regional difference. And on the next slide, you'll see that actually older people, so people who are retired and financially vulnerable, are more likely to be offline. Also people who live in rented or sheltered accommodation or with a long-term health condition or disability. So that many of those things that older people do experience are also indications for people who are digitally excluded. And the next slide shows some stats specifically around older people. And of course, one of the things that I'm sure everybody here was very concerned about back at the end of March last year was that 13% of the UK population, people over the age of 70, were recommended to shield back in March, and that's 8.6 million people. So that you've got this confluence where you've got older people who are more likely. Obviously, there's lots of older people who are definitely online, but more likely to be digitally excluded, also shielding. And that engagement online, digital engagement, goes down as you go up through the ages. Of course, it's very dependent on the individual. So the next slide shows some of the benefits for society about boosting skills, jobs, the economy. So there's research that shows for every £1 invested in helping people to gain basic digital skills, there's a return to the economy of £14.80. That might be a good one if you're campaigning, Jan and others, with the government. Health and well-being, of course, as you've said, more services are being pushed online, and of course that reduces the cost and efficiency of the health service. And of course we hear the government talk about levelling up. So if we want equality, then we definitely need to have a more digitally equal nation, and public services must have equality of access. And the next slide just shows some of those ways that individuals are helping. So connection to other people is the big one that we found during lockdown, during the pandemic. And we know shopping online, so older people, twice as many older people are shopping online now than they were before March last year. So that's like a really very, very stark picture. So the next slide, beginning to talk about what we do about this. So we're working with thousands of organisations in the heart of the community, working with them, capacity building them, providing them with products and support and services to support those local people. And the next slide shows the impact of COVID-19. So there's that map. So before COVID, that was a very close face-to-face in pairs or in small groups. But then now a lot of that work has moved online onto Zoom sessions, Zoom coffee mornings, digital mentoring. The middle picture is someone in an online centre showing, introducing a mentor to a mentee. And then on the right-hand side, that's about people in the online centres hiring bigger spaces. So the next slide will show that you can find out where those centres are near you. This is just a homepage for Good Things Foundation. Click on Find Help Near You and you can find. So the ones that are on there now are the ones that have been active during the pandemic, doing online and telephone support, as well as sometimes face-to-face when that's allowed. So the next slide shows that it's not just about that face-to-face support, but there's also free online courses. So Learn My Way has become absolutely essential during the pandemic because you can be supported to learn online in a very supported way, but using Learn My Way, because that has been co-designed with users. So that's been co-designed with users and develop new content based on their needs. So those users are people who have been recently been digitally excluded. This program, so we're supporting about 100,000, 150,000 people a year using these programs at the moment, and it's all really super easy to use, so it feels familiar. So the next slide shows one back, devices.now. So you asked about devices. So in April, Future.now, that's a big industry coalition, established devices.now, working with Good Things Foundation and Nominet. So the campaign period was up until the end of July, and then at Good Things Foundation, we've embedded this into our ongoing work. Because ironically, before the pandemic, we had done some work around devices and connectivity, but mostly it was about support, that working with those community partners to provide support. But this was about primarily money being donated, but then also laptops, and it was entirely funded through businesses and through trusts and foundations. The one I really want to point to here is that in that first period up until the end of July, 29% of the people who we supported had never used the internet before. So we and our community partners were able to engage, find, reach people who had never used the internet, and then using things like Zoom and the telephone help them without face-to-face support to learn how to use the internet. They had initial face-to-face support on the doorstep. The tablet was all set up and all the things were downloaded onto it. And we've now, since this slide is a bit out of date, but since the pandemic, we've supported over 12,000 people to get a device, to get support, and to get mobile data connectivity to go with that, because you need all three. It's not just the devices, obviously you need the connectivity and the support as well. So the next slide just says that quite often when people, and I don't think this is going to happen today, is that when people talk about digital inclusion, they get very techie. And so I just wanted to say that, you know, here are some of the smiling faces of people who have received devices from us and data and support during the pandemic, and it's about people, not technology. And my final slide just has my contact details on it. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Jan, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I forget to unmute myself. It's very informative, Helen. Thank you very much. I've got quite a few questions here from myself and from our members. One of them is about, is there a possibility, you work with Google and BT, is there a possibility, because a lot of people have lost their free TV license in the over 75 age group, And the over 75 age group in MPC is the largest age group that we actually work with. And as you say, they are the largest group that don't engage. Yeah. So there's two ways, or maybe both ways we could look at doing this. If Google and BT could somehow fund free broadband for the over 75s, so to replace their TV license fee, or what about a simple plug and play, where people who fear the internet and scamming and not wanting to be bothered with all the advertising that you get chucked at you, the different packages that change every week, if not every day, and just the bother of the internet, that plug and play is simple, very simple, where you could have a video and you could talk to people. So there are two areas that our members are interested in. Also, what can we do? And this will be a question, I guess, for other people as well. What can we do about the drive for businesses that continually want to go online and force you online? We talked earlier about choice, and the last time I looked, we still had choice in this country, although it doesn't seem like it for us older people. Yes, it might be convenient for their business, but it's not convenient for their customers. And when you look at the trauma of trying to phone someone and have to press maybe up to 8 or 9 buttons, as well as understand the messages when you're pressing the buttons and still not get a person to speak to, they give up. And I've regularly, British Gas and others are saying, oh, you know, our complaints, the amount of complaints we get, you know, severely reduced. Well, yeah, because nobody can get anyone to complain. But there's also a more dangerous aspect to that. You talk about health, right? How many people are excluded from health, you know, making an appointment with a GP. There are GPs that have put in place a telephone system that costs anywhere between 20 and 50p a minute. You're on low income, you're not going to use that. And people get more ill. And that goes beyond GPs, it goes into the actual health service, hospitals, appointments, stuff like that. So we do need something that is quite simple and cost effective for people. So what do you think about those things?
So I think, so on the first point about provision of free broadband, for example, I think that the pandemic has shown that we have an issue of data poverty in this country. So we're calling it data poverty because people who just can't afford the internet. And that there are a number of different solutions have come up. That we know that more than half of the population think that the internet should be a utility. I think Helena used the word human right. So I think that we absolutely, and Good Things Foundation is pushing with this, and we're working in collaboration with others as an initiative called Operation Wi-Fi that's bringing people together, which is about data poverty. And I do think that there is action on this. So one of the things, Darren Jones, who's an MP from the Labour Party, took a 10-minute bill last week looking for social tariffs. So to see what's the minimum price that actually the internet providers, service providers could come up with for people who qualified. I think that, I also think it's interesting what you're saying about school children and pensioners, and that is something that has bothered me. I'm not saying that we should, of course children should have access to technology to help them with their education, but I think it's really important that we have conversations like we're having today that's saying it's not just children, that digital exclusion affects people of all ages, and you know, and that mostly the people who are so 51% of households who earn less than £10,000 are not on the internet, for example. So basically the correlation with having low incomes and not being on the internet, there's such a massive overlap. So I definitely think that we should do more. I definitely think that we should be asking the government to have a much more ambitious ambition, and then work in partnership. I don't think it's just businesses who are going to do it. I think it's got to be with leadership from organisations like your own, like everyone who's here today, but also working with government. On your second point, I think for me, I think it's important to separate public services from commercial services, because absolutely public services should be available and affordable for everybody. That the government, the public sector they can't choose who their clients and customers are. If you need to visit the doctor, you need to visit the doctor. If you have a bin, you need to have it collected. They're just basic things that everybody should be expecting. I think with commercial companies, I do think it's a very interesting area, and one I think actually from organizations like which are probably much better to comment about what can be done from a kind of regulation and rights point of view. I was on You and Yours, and there was a woman there who had bought some curtains on the telephone, but then when she had a complaint and she needed something fixed, she could only get through online. I mean, that shouldn't be allowed, because if you can buy it on the telephone, you should be able to get it fixed by talking to somebody on the telephone. But I definitely think we'll hear later on about some of the ideas from Which and others.
Yeah, just one more question, Helen, before you go. Alan Sidaway from Scotland, he's asking, do you have any partners or any people up there who'd be interested to know?
Yeah, definitely. So if you go to the website and go to Find Help Near Me, you'll see the specific community partners who we've got partnership with. So everything's free for all of the community partners. We work, for example, with Local Age UK. So if anybody is from a local community organisation and you do digital inclusion, then you can join in that network. Everything is free. Learn My Way is free. And that's why we work with people like BT and Google to pay for it. Yes, I think the other thing in Scotland is also SCVO, so the Scottish Council for Vocational Volunteer Organisation, so the SCVO, try to get into the right order. So SCVO is also incredibly active in Scotland, so we definitely work in partnership with them as well.
Thank you, Helen. That's been really, really interesting. We'll have some more questions to come back to you again. Now, we turn to Jenny Haskey, who's the Chief Executive of Citizens Online, and Brian Ross Atkinson, who I understand, Jenny, is one of your project workers.
Yes, that's correct. Brian heads up our Brighton and Hove project, and he's going to share a little bit more detail on that as well. I think Jonathan's going to share our slides for us. Lovely, thank you. So again, thank you so much for welcoming us here today. We're really honoured to be able to share our work with you. Citizens Online was formed 20 years ago, and it's focused on ensuring the benefits of the internet and digital technologies are available to everybody. I only joined the organisation just in December last year. However, I was acutely aware of the challenges of digital inclusion through my own family networks, and certainly my relatives over 70, the challenges that they faced during the pandemic, many of which we've covered this morning. So just first of all, with the next slide, we all know that digitally excluded people can lack skills, confidence and motivation, along with having limited or simply no access to equipment and connectivity. Getting online is usually life enhancing. We know that it can be life changing, and we like to catch people in an informal way and give them confidence online. Our charity has worked across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. Our work is varied, but we're really focused on digital and social inclusion. We know digital inclusion isn't only about whether people can access the internet, it's really about their ability to use it. And we find the best way to help digitally excluded people, as already mentioned, is to provide one-to-one support through trusted digital champions. And I'll share shortly how we've adapted our work to tackle the particular challenges of COVID. But equally, Citizens Online thrives on collaboration. And my colleague Brian, as I said, is shortly going to share his work, our work there in Brighton and Hove. And that's been ongoing now for 5 years. But just with the next slide, why is digital inclusion so important? We know there are many barriers, many of which have already been shared. And as we say, the pandemic has just shone a spotlight on digital poverty. Many people simply don't see the internet's for them. Motivation is just one of those key barriers to doing more online. I'm acutely aware, many people actually won't even be able to see this today purely because we're online. Over 1/3 of those who are offline say the internet just simply doesn't interest them. And 48% of the digitally excluded say nothing could motivate them to get online. We like to tap into ways, we like to find what people's interests are and use that as their hook and get them comfortable. Age remains the biggest indicator of whether an individual is online, and at such a crucial time when digital can turn isolation into inclusion. The behavioural data shows that only 7% of over 70s are likely to have the capability to shop and manage their money online, and 77% of this age group have very low digital engagement. We're talking about how being able to pay for subscriptions, the equipment and connection, it's so expensive, and that's why we really welcome the campaign that you're doing to make sure we can get people more connected. Maybe through disabilities that people are isolated as well, and they just simply need more support. But confidence and fear of the unknown, people are shy and reluctant to try something new. The lack of digital skills means that people just simply won't get involved, or even technology constantly changes. We're in an ever evolving world. And I'd just like to share a quote from a lady that we were speaking to actually last week called Margaret, who was a civil servant. She retired in 2010. She was used to technology, but it's evolved so much. And she said, the thing with technology is it changes all the time, or it goes down. At work, if something didn't work, I could ring the IT guy. Can't do that whilst I'm sat at home. I simply don't have anybody to call. So if, for example, I do have a laptop and a printer and the printer didn't work, what would I do? Where would I go to? There just simply isn't that support. She also shared about her fears of security, and that's certainly something that we absolutely see is key for ensuring that many of those that do eventually get it online at an older age are very aware and very conscious of being scammed. Next slide, please. So just briefly as well, I've talked there about Margaret, who was online, but there's equally other people who just simply don't even have the equipment. So this is John, and through our work that Brian is heading up in Brighton and Hove, we were actually able to help him. He was isolating in his warden managed accommodation during the first lockdown. Whilst he was happy there, he for many months he just simply hadn't seen his children, his grandchildren. He hadn't even met some of his relatives who had been born. And with the help of ourselves and one of his family members, we were able to provide John with the technology and the ability to get online. And he now contacts and communicates with his family through WhatsApp and is enjoying an absolute new lease of life. So that's kind of a brief demonstration of the two gulfs that we recognise of people who are older. And in the next slide, I'd just like to share one of the changes that we've made based on the pandemic. So this is an absolute, as a result of the pandemic. Our work has always thrived on being face-to-face, but we have turned to setting up a free digital support helpline. This is for those who want confidence online, like Margaret, or even for those like John, who, family members may want some support in terms of helping their loved ones get connected. So many of us take being online for granted today. Like I said, we're all able to access this. We all kind of became semi-Zoom experts during the pandemic, but there are so many who are excluded, simply don't know how to get in touch with one another. This helpline is there to help people. The main skill of our volunteers, our digital champions who manage this, is patience. As we've just touched on, digital inclusion isn't about being technical, and our volunteers don't have to be technical. They simply need patience to help one another. This is a great resource, and we are so grateful for this opportunity to share this number and this opportunity with you and your wider networks. And now I'll hand over to Brian, who will talk particularly about Brighton and Hove.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks everyone, and thanks Jenny. So yeah, next slide, you can go for it. So yes, the core things about what we do at Digital Brighton and Hove is that we have the tenets of a cross-sector collaborative partnership. This program began 5 years ago with the One Digital project, and it grew actually through the One Digital project. So I've been working adjacent to Helen for a number of years, and it's great that we're here doing this fantastic work. The great thing about the One Digital program is that it was a cross-sector partnership with the SCVO, as we've already heard about, Clarion Housing Group, which is the UK's largest housing association, Age UK, Digital Unite, and of course Citizens Online, where I'm at now. And the great thing about that is it champion digital champions. And the core thing about that word in and of itself, for people who understand digital, it's a turn on, it's great, we get it, Wi-Fi, internet, buzzwords, broadband, we're on it. But people who are not included, it's a turn off. What do we mean when we say digital? So the way that I approach this work is by defining that word. And for me, it means human. It's about that human connection. And as Citizens Online, it's social inclusion through digital inclusion. And that's the work that's key about what we're doing here. It's about connecting humans. We're doing it now. We're connecting through this fantastic interface. We're going live. And as it says in the second point, we used to work in libraries and community settings and supporting a lot of the Learn My Way centers and engaging people there. But we at Digital Brighton and Hove were the council's first digital, or the council's digital first program. And they still support us at the Council of Brighton and Hove. Next, please. So a lot of the problems you can imagine, there's a misnomer if we go to the middle image, the belief that everyone's online now. And almost thankfully, the pandemic has highlighted the fact that that is just not the case. We continually have the problem of having sustainable and responsive funding, but dealing with the fact that people utilizing digital services have to understand how to navigate poorly designed and inaccessible digital services. You know, there's a huge need for low cost data and connectivity, and these are the problems that are highlighted that we at Digital Brighton and Hove work to overcome and circumvent. We support our digital champions remotely, and we're fortunate that it wasn't so much of a paradigm shift for us to take this work online. And next slide. So an interesting quote here is that, as you can see, the survey for the Health Foundation illustrates the digital divide in specific relation to where we are now. And when asked whether they would download a COVID-19 contact tracing app, 71% of people with a degree said they would download the app, falling to only 38% of those with no formal qualifications. And while 70% aged over 65 years old reporting that they did not have a smartphone. So, you know, we're in a society where they've sunk 12 million into a COVID tracing app with no concern as to, okay, what about a large percentage of the population who don't have access to the facilities to utilize that. And that's a clear indication of the digital divide, if ever there was one. Next slide. So the key thing in what we do down here is that we work with Brighton and Hove City Council. And as I've mentioned before, it's about coordinating our work. Whilst we are in this space, we do not purport to be experts, because an expert is almost something that is stagnant. We are continually learning. We have a network of over 350 organizations and individuals who we support and learn from in how to support the region and get people online and stay connected. Next slide. One of our fantastic projects that we've done is in line with Future.Now, is that they gave us tablets in order for us to distribute. And we've grown that program and expanded it so far to seek further funding from the lottery or communities fund, I should say. And that helps us reach people and not only give them the technology, but we also give them the connectivity. And we wrap that out with a trifecta digital champion support. We're not only going, here you go, here's the technology, and here's the data so you can get online. We're saying we will also provide you that support. We've got the free phone number. Give us a call and we will walk you through how to get that set and how to stay online. It's a loan scheme that we have, and it runs for 3 months, and then we do a pick up and drop off with other people that may need it too. Next slide. One of the fantastic opportunities about being in this space is that we worked with an organization called Jangala. And as we know that having broadband is sometimes the intuitive affair, getting drills in your house and holes in the wall and wires put in and stuff like that. And those things are barriers to entry for some people. But there's a fantastic organization that have created a set-top box called the Get Box. And that enables you to get Wi-Fi from a 4G signal. And we've trialed that. We were able to prototype that with a housing association in Brighton, working with Diversity and Ability. And that connected 28 people sufficiently to stay online and to get Wi-Fi. They're now moving to a space where they want to capitalize on that. So there's another opportunity for people who are in residential homes or individual housing and want to have access at a relatively cheap price without the whole intuitiveness of drills and stuff. Next slide. So this is Anna. She's our community digital champion, and these are the things that she does on a day-to-day basis. She's the backbone of the work that we do. So she provides support over the phone for people who need it. And I think we've touched on the core thing here is that there's a lot of trepidation around confidence and motivation in getting online, and having that human to speak to really help bridge that gap. And then of course there's video calling and conferencing services, which you utilize to speak to someone, to talk them through, to share the screen, to support them in doing that. We've created guides. So when we send out a tablet to someone, we've got really easy step-by-step guides. When they take it out of the box, there's a printout that says, okay, do this, do that, turn it on here, etc. And we don't just say, okay, we've given you the instructions. We do check it and we make sure that how they're doing and how are they set and are they confident online. I think that's the key thing. So when you have the equipment and we have the connectivity, are you confidently and safely utilizing the technology? And then again, we publicizing that and let people know that we are here. It's a hand-holding exercise. And interestingly, take heart. We've heard a lot of statistics about people, the elderly, maybe not being able to stay online. With the work that we do, we help to keep people online. But statistically, in what we found in the One Digital program is that The hardest people to convert online are those aged between 40 and 50 who've lived their whole life and been like, I don't do that, I get my grandkids to do it, have no reason to be online. Actually, people who I fondly refer to as silver surfers are people that yeah, easily to convert online. Once you give someone the hook and the rationale to be online, whether that be communicating with family members, shopping, and doing all of these things that we take for granted, I think it's then easier because then they find the need to. Next slide. So here are two fantastic quotes from people who we've worked with. We haven't named them because I don't have their permissions, GDPR. But yeah, the fantastic thing is that this work is really about human to human connectivity. And whilst the pandemic presented a challenge in taking away that ability to connect with someone on a one-to-one, side-to-side, in front of a computer basis, we've used that as an opportunity to say, hey, we can use, whether it's Skype, Zoom, GoToMeeting, or whatever, we can get in contact with you and keep you online. Next slide. And that's us. You've been a fantastic audience. It'd be great to hear some questions, and there are contact details online if you want to know anything else about what we said or something we don't touch on here. There was something that you mentioned earlier, Jen. I think it was a question you asked Helen. I think it was something to do with whether or not people can get online. There's another service called Sparko.tv, and they do a fantastic service where they provide a technology which is actually, it seems like it's just a TV, but through this TV, you can have video calls, you can do online learning, you can do so many things, you can share photos. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a computer in the traditional sense to get people online.
Thank you, Jenny and Brian. I have some questions, quite a lot of them, actually. Let's go. This one is from Pauline, who is engagement officer for Haringey. And she's saying that, you've highlighted issues around COVID. Even before COVID, there was a digital divide, which was already an issue. And the lockdown just exacerbated that. And she said, what I found was that age, lack of opportunities or skills, and affordability are the main barriers to overcome. And she's set up things, little programs like Coffee and Computers to upskill residents and connectivity hubs. So that's obviously really, really good. The issue around Margaret reminded me that one of our vice presidents, Ellen, she lost her internet, a computer and a telephone all at once in one day. It took 2 days to put right. And in that time, she was completely frustrated because, when you're at home, as she has been since March, it's kind of, the computer is where you go to. She will answer emails to do with NPC work. She will connect with friends. She will connect with family. But for 2 days, no, nearly 3 days, she was completely isolated, and it started to affect her mental health. So maybe there are issues there in terms of people who have been isolated for a lot of time, together with the language that people use around technology, which I don't profess to understand. My technology guru is currently in New Zealand, so I have to wait 13 hours for anything that goes wrong to be put right, but at least I have that access. And there's another one that actually does say that when you're at work, you can have access to IT, but who do you get to when you're on your own and your computer stops working? You might not be online, so how do you do that? I'll leave it to either one of you or both of you to answer some of that.
Well, I think, you know, that's an awful scenario to be in, and I think that's an issue that would affect any of us. You know, losing your computer and all sorts of connectivity in one day. But I think the core thing about this work, as I said, it's about that human to human connection. And as much as we're touting digital, you know, you can't forget the basics. And that's, you know, if someone can pick up a phone and speak to you. I think it's unfortunate that she lost her phone, but I think in the main is to get in touch with someone. What the service we provide, it's the thing about digital, it's either a catch-all or it's a turn-off, and people get that mistaken with IT and tech support and everything else. But the whole thing about digital is just about connectivity. So at the first point of call, if someone can get in touch with us, then we signpost. I think that's another undervalued element within this work of digital inclusion. It's that you do not have to have the answers. So, you know, for those people that have got a little, you mentioned the lady in Haringey, she's got a club and someone's coming and got a problem. You don't have to have the answers, but you can show them where to find the answer. I think that's the key thing. The key thing about digital championing is, hey, this is best practice. You know, I love working with someone who has an iPhone not because I know how to use it. I don't know anything about iPhones, but I know how to find out. And once someone sees you model how to find out that information, then they feel confident in the line. And I think there's a lot of this work which goes beyond hardware and things. It's actually just about people and working together to find solutions.
Absolutely. There was another lady who we spoke with last week who, you know, she'd articulated very much about how she went to Tesco's once a week. That was her one trip out and her one social kind of experience each week. And the reason she shared that with us was we were asking about her online activity. And again, she'd worked previously in an environment where she had access to a computer. So she knew that with emails, she could put them in files. And it just so happened that while she was in the middle of an aisle in Tesco, she was chatting to one of the young shop workers who was trying to show her how to store these and move these emails. And she just said, I was stood in the middle of Tesco's in the middle of a pandemic, and somebody's very kindly showing me, but it was going in one ear and out of the other. So, you know, what I need is somebody, I need to be able to write it down, or I need somebody with patience to talk me through it. And I think that wraps up everything that Brian was just saying. It's not actually just about the little technical bits. It's actually about engagement. It's actually about human people. And for me, the crux of that story when she shared it with us, it wasn't about filing her emails, it was about engagement. It was about talking to somebody. She was in Tesco's having a conversation with somebody, you know. And so our phone line, whilst we can't work face to face as much as we'd love to, our phone line is there to try and help. We can't solve everything, but there's a patient person at the end of the telephone line who can do their best to help those people in any circumstance. So yeah, absolutely, please share that phone line and get people help. Like I say, it's not just for people who can't get online at all, it's also people who just want confidence. You know, it's just absolutely key, as Brian says, digital is really just about human connection.
Yeah. Jenny, last question is asked of you, and it's from Bridget Sam-Bailey. How do you persuade the diehards who simply refuse to get involved with digitalisation? Because obviously when this happens, it means, you know, other costs are incurred, keeping those people informed and included. I mean, I don't think Bridget for 1 minute is saying that everybody should be digitalised, but it's how you perhaps persuade those very, very, very hard to persuade people.
Absolutely. And as I touched on when I first joined and started the presentation, I became acutely aware about digital exclusion during the pandemic. So whilst my parents have an iPad which they stare into day and night, they are very reluctant to do various things, and they were forced into an environment with the first lockdown where they would move to online shopping. What transpired is that my older relatives, so their brothers and sisters, actually, were totally excluded. And my mum was having to order food for her older brothers and sisters so that they could take the food. And this was a lockdown. My parents should have been shielding, as were all of the other relatives. And there was just simply nothing that they could do. Morrison's were sending out food parcels, so you could phone up and order a food parcel. However, my auntie didn't have the means to pay for that because we are slowly moving towards a cashless society. She spends cash. So the pandemic has forced us to look at this more, and I think it is for all of us to try and, like I say, recognize that we all take digital for granted, and so many of our society don't have the means, but also don't have they're not interested. So I am still working on my auntie and uncle, trust me. We will get there slowly. And I am, giving my parents more and more confidence. I too had to shield during the first lockdown. Had I not have been able to FaceTime my parents and my family, then I would have been incredibly isolated. So digital was absolutely a saviour. But yeah, there are so many people. We say that the hook is not to talk technical and not to preach, but actually find out what somebody's interest is. And there was a lovely story about a little old lady who was absolutely stubborn, diehard. You'll never get me online. What's your hobby? Knitting. So that's why digital doesn't at all appeal to me. Well, actually, let's introduce you very briefly to the whole world that opens up online when you look at knitting. And that was one way to tap in, take somebody online. So it comes back again to that human connection, as Brian said, let's find a hook. The world is going more digital. We need to make sure everybody is catered for, but trying to give people encouragement is always a positive step, I feel.
Thank you, Jenny. Right, looking at the time, we need to move on. And thank you very much, Jenny and Brian. Lots of other questions coming in that I will produce for the panel after this. We're going to go now to Roger Jenkins, who's the National Officer for GMB.
Hi, Jan. Thanks very much. First, apologies for me keep turning the screen off. I've got a 11-week-old puppy who today has decided to be a great day to learn to unplug and try to eat the laptop. So it's been an interesting morning, but she's calmed down a bit now, so hopefully this will be okay.
It's not children's box. Yeah.
Yeah, same. I'm a National Officer for the GMB Trade Union. Before we go right into the slideshow, I'll give a little bit of background of where we are on the cashless society. So part of my role is to look after the cash industry. So I represent those people that work within those organisations that collect, store and deliver cash around the country. So these are the people that take the money to the banks, they take the money to the businesses, they fill up the ATM machines. When those are full, they take it away and they process it all. It's a hugely expensive industry to run, as you can imagine, because there's an awful lot of people out there in society that would love to get their hands on that money. So security is a huge issue. We've seen over the years a move, particularly with the digital age, of a move away from cash. And we really started looking at this in around 2019. The reason for that was that for the first time since the invention of the cash machine, 2019 was the first year that we saw a reduction in the amount of cash machines that were available. So looking at the way the world was going, for the protection of that cash industry, so we still had an operation in the country where the cash would get to where it's needed, we had about 15 years with the slow decline in the use of cash. So we're starting to look 15 years ahead of the things we could put in place, how we protect those people that need cash, how we can get people onto digital with the ability to pay. So a long-term project. And then early this year, COVID-19 hit. And I remember the day very well when it happened, when I got the report that overnight, there was a 60% reduction in the use of cash in this country. That's what we expected to happen in 15 years, and it happened in March of this year. That, for me, as a trade union official, meant 3,000 of my members were made redundant. So that was the biggest first hit that we took. It was then we started the campaign to try and save cash. And what we found was it was difficult to get the message out there through all the COVID noise. So what we did was break down society into its component parts, if you like, to see what the effects were on different parts of society. And there were two groups that were really affected negatively for this, and that was the elderly and those that are in poverty. There are 6 million people in this country that have absolute reliance on cash. If you remove cash tomorrow, there's 6 million people will be financially excluded from everything. So we knew there was something we had to do. So I'll take you through some of the evidence that we've got and what we've been trying to do. So Jonathan is kindly doing my slides for me. So we could have the next one, please, Jonathan. This year is the amount of use of cash machines, and the key ones to look at really is the 2020. And if you look at the difference between 2018 and 2020, and these are in millions, so 2.918 billion pounds were circulating through the cash machines in 2018 to 2020, that's gone down to 1.6. And you can see the amounts that are being taken out from 125 billion on the bottom in 2018 to just 81 billion. So a huge reduction in the amount of use of cash machines. What's interesting as well is the number of cash machines. Not only are we seeing a huge reduction, and where you've got areas of the country where the bank is closed, the building society is closed, and now the ATM has disappeared, then there's people who haven't got access to that cash. And we're also seeing a change now in the cash machines where the amount of free to use cash machines is dropping dramatically. And we're seeing an increase in the cash machines that charge you to take your money out. Now, if you're in a position where every penny counts, there are many millions in this country that are, you've got £20 left in your account and you want to take that £20 out to be able to spend to feed yourself, and you're getting charged for the use of that money, that's a real huge problem for people in that position. So next slide, please, Jonathan. Again, this is the volume in millions of cash that's circulating around society and being used. And the red line again is this year. You can see when I talked about the slow decline, the top lines there with the declines year on year running up to that. So you can see a slow bit, but that drop here, and you can see April of 2020, where this is where the lockdown hit. And there's been very little increase since then. So there's a huge move to digital payments. Now those digital payments, contactless is a big one, obviously, but also internet shopping, huge rise in that. Home shopping from supermarkets, 180% increase in home shopping in the supermarkets. And I'm sure anybody that's trying to get a slot in the supermarket to get delivered at the moment, you're finding huge difficulty. There's also a campaign being run by a small group within the world that will benefit from a cashless society, and those tend to be Visa, MasterCard, Google, and your big internet shoppers such as Amazon. And then your financial institutions, because if I run a bank, if I can run that bank digitally and remove the cost of the building in the high street and the staff that I have to employ in there, then that's a financial benefit for myself. But of course, the negative effect on people in society from that happening and really pushing people into that cashless society. The move to a cashless society isn't going to be a choice that we make. It's something that's inevitable at the moment. I talked about the infrastructure and the cost of running that business. The cash business at the moment is right on a knife edge, where if we don't see an increase in the use of cash or a further decline, it will no longer be financially viable. And what that will mean, there's no money being transported around the country, so there's no money in the banks, no money in the ATMs, and there's no money in the tills. So there will be no choice. There will be no access to physical cash, and we're getting very close to that point with these kind of drops off in the use of cash. Next slide, please, Jonathan. So the top lines, cash issues down to around 30 to 40% of pre-COVID. 58% of all payments in 2010, but now only 23% of payments in cash this year. 2.1 million people mainly use cash for their day-to-day spending. And it is just, it really isn't looking good. We're just on a downward spiral. We talk about the concentration of certain groups. Certainly younger people are much more comfortable with using contactless payments, pay by on your watch or on your phone. But that's certainly not the case for many of us, and I would include myself in that. Next slide, please, Jonathan. So these are the ATM numbers, and I mentioned this earlier. So free to use ATMs, there's a 15% reduction. Free access is an 11-point reduction. Pay to use ATMs is the smallest reduction. So when the ATMs disappear, it tends not to be the pay to use, and that's the only area that we've seen an increase. Significant increase in cash machines of every other type, but it's only the pay to use that we're seeing an increase in the numbers. Next slide, please. So the government did announce in March 2020 that they would put in legislation to protect cash. So removing barriers, widespread adoption of cashback without the purchase. So that's one thing the government has talked about, with the right to walk into a shop, use your card to withdraw cash from the till, if you like, without purchasing. We certainly need regulation. It's regulated at the moment by the financial industry, who have good reason for not to oppose a cashless society. So we're looking at a single regulator and calling on government to do that. But the reality is, the only way the cash will be protected is to give people the right to pay for goods and services in cash. And as a trade union, that in reality is all that we're asking for. So if I have money in my pocket and I want to buy goods, I have the right to use that physical cash to buy it, not to be told that I have to use contactless or I have to go onto the internet. Next slide, please, Jonathan. So our campaign, we set up the Save the Cash campaign in summer of 2020. We surveyed our retired members. And it was interesting at that point that 384 of them had been refused to buy goods using cash. So physically walked into a shop with money in their hand, tried to purchase goods, and 384 of them had been told, don't want your money, you can't pay contactless, I don't want your business. Now, for somebody who's in the position where cash is their only way of paying, how do you buy your food? How do you do it if the local shop is refusing to take it? So there's been debates in Parliament. We've had some excellent support from some of the MPs, and David Mundell has been instrumental in this. We have a campaign where letters are going to the Chancellor asking for that legislation to come in to protect cash. Now, it was interesting during the debates in Parliament that the Minister said he was not willing to legislate, force companies to take cash. But we know that that is the only thing that will stop us from moving to a cashless society. You know, that idea of being able to recycle cash locally by being able to take your card into the shop and getting cash back, that's all well and good. But if you're not allowed to spend it in an awful lot of outlets, there's no point in having cash in the first place. So some of the other areas, I think that's the last slide, Jonathan. If you just check for me, and yes, it is. So some of the other areas that aren't really being considered at the moment, and as we move, particularly across to internet shopping and home shopping, this is the effect on the high street. And we've seen it with Debenhams lately, haven't we? You know, Debenhams have gone under, the stores are closing. They've been bought out now by an internet company, so all they've bought the name. Those shops will never open again. They will never sell goods. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, those high streets, those shopping centres, that going out for me is, it's where I meet friends. It's where I socialise one-to-one and have that human contact. It's where I sit down and have a coffee with people. And I think that's a huge thing to lose. I mean, being able at the moment, particularly within COVID, to interact with people and socialise with people digitally is a huge and amazing and important thing. But it is never, ever a replacement for human contact. There was a question earlier about schools and laptops, and it's interesting the information coming out, particularly from primary school now, is the biggest loss for children who are not able to go to school at primary school isn't so much the education, it's the social interaction. It's learning how to interact with people, and you know, we are social animals, and moving totally towards a digital society and a cashless society will certainly help achieve that. I honestly don't believe it is good for any of us. And I think the last thing I would say, to me, it's about control. I like to be in control of my money, my cash. And we've seen in the past where there's an economic problem, we have that global economic problem. What's the first thing we do? We rush off to the banks, we draw our money out, we've got the ATMs, we get the money because it's mine, it's safe, I've got it in my hands. Cashless society means that cash doesn't actually exist and it's never actually in your control. It's simply a number on a spreadsheet that somebody else holds, that somebody else controls. And with I was lucky enough to be over in Greece towards the end of the last big economic problem, where they'd actually put a limitation on the amount of cash that people were able to have. So if the banks held your money, they said, no, you can only have 50 euros. That's the maximum you can have. So there is an awful lot of being able to control your own money, being able to take that money, being able to spend that money. And I would say again, you know, I remember growing up, my mother had the pots on the shelf, and the one was for the shopping, the one was for the electric, the one was for our clothes, and the money went in that pot. And she knew when that pot was empty, she didn't spend any more on that product or those goods. Whereas there's an awful lot of people, if you move into contactless payment, trying to control how much you spend is very difficult. And it's very easy to move over into spending more than you have. And we know what banks do with that. If you spend the money you haven't got and you haven't got an agreement to do it, then they charge you for it extra. And that's that spiral into debt. So for those groups that absolutely rely on cash, the availability and the ability to be able to use cash is just so important. And the only other thing I would say is just thank you very much for inviting me today, and thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Roger. There's been a lot of activity on our questions, a lot of comments. A lady called Judith, who's 82, who, along with us, a long time ago, we had a campaign to keep cheques, because that was cheques and cash were the way that older people did their business. Cheques are still around. We did get a little bit of a fright a couple of years ago when they said they were going to stop the clearing banks from clearing them, but that didn't come to fruition. So cheques are still valid, and as far as I can see, cash is still valid. And I do totally agree with Roger on the issue of being able to control what you spend yourself. You shouldn't be told by someone else who holds your money that you can't have your cash to spend the way that you want to spend it. Yeah. So Judith now finds that, you know, the local bank is closed, the ATM then closed, and to get to a bank of any kind takes transport, and it's transport with a lot of difficulties and barriers. So we are totally behind your campaign, as you know, Roger. Anything we can do that helps you take it further, please let us know. What about when technology fails, as it did in supermarkets last week, where people couldn't make card payments? The supermarkets had to take cash, yeah, or go without the business. So maybe there's a bit of a campaign when we can get back out on the streets again about, you know, boycotting particular people who won't take cash, you know, with our banners and things like that. I think it needs to be out on the street where people can, you know, at the moment it's hidden because people are isolated at home. We don't get much news on the TV about cash. There was a program on the Tonight program a week or so ago, which was very good. And of course, we have to remember that banks have shareholders and they always want their money over and above what we want. So I think there's a case for community banks, certainly for shops being trialled at the moment to give cash back where there's no purchase. You know, currently you have to have a purchase to get cash back, but there are trials going on around the country that will give you cash back without a purchase. I think that's another way to go. But we do have to keep this fight up, Roger, and we will help you any way that we can. There's some more questions, but I need to move on, and then we'll round up the questions with the other panelists. So thank you very much for coming today and giving me your time. I know you're a busy man. Right, can we now ask Genevieve Lloyd, who's the campaigns manager for Which, to give her presentation? Thank you, Genevieve.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion today. I unfortunately don't have any slides to take you through, but actually one of the blessings, I suppose, of going last is we're all talking about very similar things. So a lot of the key stats and data, etc., has already been displayed. But I will just talk through, for those of you who don't know Which, really quickly. We are the UK's largest consumers association with over 1.3 million members and supporters. We are not for profit, and our mission is to make life simpler, fairer, and safer for consumers across the UK. So I think it's fair to start with kind of the observation that digital inclusion, financial inclusion, as well as sort of Roger's highlighted, kind of overlap, and they've been overlapping issues for a long time. But I think the pandemic has really shone a light on just how wide that gap is between those who are digitally and financially included and those who aren't. And as we've heard through the presentations today, the pandemic has really, I suppose, cemented that relationship between digital and financial inclusion, as it's becoming increasingly difficult to operate, to pay for things, to engage in the economy, engage in wider society without also being digitally enabled. So we believe that there is a really key need for consumer organizations like Which, other charities and organizations like yourselves, policymakers and businesses to actually work together to try and make sure that the transition towards digital is as smooth as possible for everyone. And I think it's also important at this stage to stress that, you know, we're not anti-innovation. This is not, from Which's perspective, this is not about trying to stop people who are able to benefit from, you know, the benefits of digital. This is not about stopping them from embracing it, but this is about making sure that if we do, you know, move to an increasingly cashless or an increasingly digital society, that happens in a way that suits everyone's needs, that it works in a time frame or at a pace that works for everyone, and it works in a way that meets everyone's expectations. So people who move online, perhaps at a time what they feel is sort of sooner than they would like, or, you know, in a way that they would not have done themselves or chosen themselves, but that is done in a way without them having to reduce their expectations of customer service, of the products, etc., the quality of products, etc., that they use. So there are sort of three broad areas that I'd like to focus on, many of which have already, as I said, been touched upon. But the first is really access to broadband. and simply getting online in the first place. And this is something that we've worked on as Which for a number of years now, where we're particularly looking at infrastructure and the need to make sure that infrastructure, whether that's broadband and mobile coverage, to be honest, across the country, making sure that that is evenly spread and that the majority, if not every consumer, has access to a reliable and secure connection. So it's really concerning that in 2021 now, there are still households who don't have access to a decent broadband connection, especially when, as everyone stressed, it's become a lifeline for so many during this pandemic. And some of the research from Ofcom, who is the regulator in this space, some of the research is particularly telling. So 51% of UK adults over the age of 75 don't use the internet or are non-internet users, compared to 13% of the general population of UK adults. And of those of the same age, 26% are not confident when it comes to using the internet. In addition, linking it to sort of financial inclusion, only 53% of over 65s use online banking, which is an increasingly big issue, as we've mentioned, when we see widespread bank branch and ATM closures. You can really start to see a picture emerge where one group in particular is at risk of being partially, or in some cases fully, excluded from the economy and society as this shift to digital picks up. And I think there's no arguing that the pandemic has really accelerated that shift. And that push is coming from changes in consumer behavior as much as changes in business behavior or business incentives. And I think we've touched on some of those, particularly financial institution incentives in this conversation already. So I think there's, from our perspective, it's vital that people have the right skills and technology to be able to use digital services. Skills are really important when we talk about that confidence of using digital services. So we've seen, industry initiatives during the pandemic that have been rolled out to support vulnerable customers. We've already talked about, delivering technology to certain groups and kind of whether that can be applied to sort of older consumers as well. But I think it's important that people are able to remain connected during this time, but it's increasingly important to remember that this isn't just a pandemic problem, and that these issues, existed before the pandemic, and they will exist, if not, sort of will be exacerbated when things go back to normal. And so as part of our work in this space as Which, as I mentioned, we've been working with government and industry to make sure that the right infrastructure is being rolled out as quickly as it possibly can. But we also chair the government's Gigabit Take-Up Advisory Group. Apologies for bringing technical phrases into this conversation, but that's really just a group focused, and I know Good Things Foundation are involved in that as well, really a group to make sure that consumer and business uptake of sort of quality broadband is as quick and effective as possible. So I think there's a really key piece of work there that needs to be done to just make sure that people can actually get online. If we talk about digitization, people actually have the infrastructure and technology to do so. I think it would also be remiss of me, coming from Which, to not, building on concerns around digital skills and confidence, to not touch on the increase in online scams and concerns in that space. And this is something that at Which we've been increasingly vocal on over the years. And inevitably, as we spend more time online, there's a greater risk of falling victim to what are incredibly sophisticated scams in some cases. And we previously highlighted the dangers of investment scams, any scams related with data breaches, which are increasingly common. And we've also highlighted the dangers of fake reviews. So if we talk about online shopping and the shift towards, Amazon shopping on Google, etc., there are lots of products that may be unsafe, that may be unreliable, that might be fake products that are being sold online and are being promoted by fake reviews. And that is something that we've spent quite a lot of time trying to work with regulators, etc., to stamp out. It's really about making sure people have the information they need to make the right decision, buying decisions, whether that's online or not. Just in the last month, one of our investigations uncovered gaps in online banking security systems that made it easier for criminals to scam customers. So we've been working for the past 5 years. We actually launched a super complaint, which is a tool that Which is able to, a legal tool that Which is able to use at our discretion, which forces regulators and government to have to look at a particular issue. And we launched a super complaint about 5 years ago now, looking at authorized push payment fraud, which is essentially when you might give your details to a solicitor. If you're buying a house, for example, this is a very common example. You give your bank details to your solicitor, gives their bank details to you. You then look to make your transfer for your deposit, and actually a scammer had got in the way of that email, and you have knowingly or unknowingly transferred that deposit to a scammer. When we first started in this space, there were no protections whatsoever for consumers in that position. So we've been working with industry to try and make sure that that reimbursement and that those victims of those scams who by no fault of their own have just transferred money to somebody who is not their solicitor or is not the intended recipient. We've been working with industry to make sure that that sort of reimbursement is looked at as a priority, and we're calling on the government to ensure that the reimbursement of bank transfer scam victims is made mandatory. So we're working at the moment with the regulator and government on designing that code. Additionally, our research has found things like online platforms such as Google and Facebook haven't done enough to prevent fraudsters from exploiting their systems and are falling short in protecting their users. So we really want to see the government come forward and make those online platforms that we all trust. They're brands that we know, they're brands that we use day in and day out. We want to make sure that the government gives them more legal responsibility to stop fraudulent content from appearing on their sites in the first place. This is really about stopping those scams before they actually sort of take hold, as it were. So I think this really comes down to something that we've all been talking about so far, which is making sure that people have the right skills, the right information, the right awareness and education to use the internet in a safe way. But it's also about making sure that businesses and the businesses that we interact with across the piece, whether that's the online platform that we're on, whether that's the shop that we're buying from, whether that's the bank that we put our money into, this is about making sure that they all have a responsibility to make sure that we are safe as customers online. And I suppose the final piece, which is largely why I was invited here today, is to talk about access to cash and our Freedom to Pay campaign. And it's actually a really nice following on from Roger there, so thank you for that. Obviously, the sort of concerns are the same. We launched our campaign, our Freedom to Pay campaign in 2017, focusing purely on ATMs at the time. And as Roger pointed out, the very worrying trend of reductions in ATMs, particularly free ATMs across the country. But this is really broadened out from our perspective into a payments campaign and a access to essential financial services or essential banking services campaign. Because as we're seeing, you can't remove the use of cash from the face-to-face support that a lot of people also use in branch, a lot of the services that people use at things like the post office that they want to see in person or want to use in person. So to give you a sense of scale, and forgive me if I repeat anything that Roger may have touched on, but pre-pandemic, 1.7 million people said that they only used cash every day. They had no other form of payment whatsoever. 8 million people said that they would struggle without cash. In our most recent research, which came out earlier this month, in January, during the pandemic, we conducted this research during the pandemic, and we found an estimated 11 million people in the UK now say that they are not ready to make that switch to digital and would not be able to function without cash. We also know that in general, cash users do tend to be older. They do tend to be on lower incomes for all the reasons that have been mentioned. Budgeting is a very key one, and also tend to be in rural or more remote areas. And that touches on the issues around connectivity that sort of we've all mentioned as well. A lot of smaller shops, etc., won't have card machines or card readers that work all the time. You might have a dodgy connection, etc. So cash is a really important lifeline for some of those communities. So as I say, to combat this, we launched our Freedom to Pay campaign. Since then, we've had over 175,000 people sign our petition, where we're calling on the government to legislate to protect access to cash for as long as it is needed. And as Roger mentioned, we had a commitment from the government at the budget last year that they would introduce this legislation. Our view is that there needs to be a single regulator that oversees cash, and that's everything from stocking your ATMs to making sure that shops are encouraged or incentivized to continue to accept cash, through to making sure that ATMs and bank branches / the post office are all available to the people that need them, and making sure that as consumer behavior changes, we're mapping on those groups to make sure that even if the group of people who use cash continues to decrease, that those people aren't, as that group gets smaller, that they still aren't then further excluded as a result. So really, as I say, this goes back to choice. This is about making sure that people who may not want to use anything other than cash people who may not have other options for, you know, reasons beyond their control, or people who are opting to use cash because it helps them to budget. This is about making sure that cash is there for all of those people and for all of those needs. And what we've discovered over the course of this campaign has been, this isn't just about a one size fits all and sort of push everyone onto card and everyone will be okay and give everyone the, you know, technology they need and it's fine. There are very, very specific reasons why people use cash. We've worked with the RNIB during this campaign around people who are partially sighted, for example, who aren't comfortable using PIN pads because they can't see or read the amount that is on the terminal, but they know what cash feels like and can count their money when they're paying at the till. We've worked with other charities such as Refuge, where we talk about victims of domestic violence who are trying to leave, you know, dangerous situations by saving cash because it is not traceable. So there are some very, very real reasons, should I say, why people can't use cash, and that require very, very specific interventions from government or a regulator to make sure that sort of all of those gaps are covered before we move to anything remotely cashless. I suppose touching on wrap up, touching on some of the stuff that Roger mentioned around acceptance, I think this is also a really important point, and it is a growing issue that wasn't really looked at pre-pandemic. But what we've found from our research is 1 in 3 people, so 30% of people, have been refused cash since March, refused to use cash since March. So they've been trying to buy essential goods. 4 in 10 people weren't able to buy medicine or groceries as a result. That, you know, in some cases might be as simple as having to go next door and buy this exact same good. But if you have one shop in town, or, you know, you've traveled far to get to your store or your pharmacy or wherever it might be, to not be able to buy what you need and what is essential, despite having cash in hand, you know, is completely unacceptable, particularly given how many people still rely, and quite openly still rely, on cash every day. So we're working with government, we're working with the banks, we're also doing some work with retailers to try and make sure that not only is this legislation going to be introduced quickly so that access to cash via ATMs, bank branches, etc., is protected, but also to make sure that we've talked about banking security, we've talked about moving cash around the country and how much that costs, making sure that while some retailers or some businesses may not want to accept cash because that doesn't work for their customer base, you know, a coffee shop in the middle of Shoreditch may not feel that it needs to accept cash, and at which our position is that that is okay, as long as when it comes to essential goods, when it comes to things that people sort of cannot live without, that people are able to buy those goods or pay for those services using cash. I think we've talked about the difference between commercial organizations and public as well during this discussion. And I think while it's a very important distinction to make, the point still stands around essential items, and they may come from a commercial organization or not. I think there is still a responsibility to ensure that people are able to pay for things in a way that suits their needs. So as we mentioned, we got the government commitment to legislate, and just last week, because we're still waiting for this legislation, and it does look like it will be a while in the making, just last week, our CEO Annabelle wrote to the 8 biggest retail banks to ask them to publicly commit to both the post office network and make sure that cash services and over-the-counter bank branch services continue to be offered at the post office, and to commit to Link, which is the ATM network, as Roger pointed out, to commit to both of those to make sure that until legislation is introduced, the sort of rug isn't pulled out from underneath us and the cash network completely crumbled. Because as we've seen from places like Sweden, where they've gone extremely close to being cashless, they've now had to introduce retrospective legislation to try and reverse some of the damage or counter some of the damage that has caused. So we're really keen that we don't get to that point, because it is really hard to come back, I suppose, from that point of no return. So we're just focusing on that, getting that legislation, keen to work with organizations like GMB, Good Things Foundation, Citizens Online, etc., to make sure that, you know, where we can, we're sort of making as much noise as possible. And I think, Jan, on your point about boycotting, I think there is a lot to be said for voting with your feet, and where banks are coming out and saying we don't support cash, where shops are saying that we won't accept cash, or where, you know, other businesses are just saying cash isn't for us. If that doesn't suit your needs, as a consumers organization, we would always say, consider switching, consider moving on, and actually, using your consumer power to enact that change as well. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm sure there'll be some questions.
Thank you, Genevieve. That was really good. Can I just talk about, you talked about the post office and banks. Just recently, the post office has not been able to pay pensions unless people have a bank account. Is that one of the areas that is in that kind of conspiracy, if you like?
I think with the post office is in an interesting position because it's obviously got sort of statutory obligations to be in and around every community. So it is physically there. But one of the problems with, I suppose, the fragility, what we're talking about when it comes to cash and that sort of general banking piece is it is still a commercial arrangement between the post office and individual banks. So, if you want to, whatever services it might be, and it might be, collecting your pension, it might be making cash withdrawals, it might be being able to check your balance, whatever it might be across the piece, that all depends on the negotiation between the post office and, as I say, your individual banks. And so we saw last year, Barclays threatened to leave or said that they would leave the post office framework agreement when it came to cash withdrawals, which would mean that if you were a Barclays customer, you could not access cash from the post office, despite bank branches at the same time closing. So I think really this is where that regulator point comes in from us, and that role of government is this shouldn't be down to commercial agreements between individual entities that can be broken at any one point. This is really about making sure that there is that kind of oversight and sort of holistic view of all the issues around cash and banking.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say at this point, Ofcom, the regulator of all these things, of broadband supplies, of the post office, of TV, all those things that we've been talking about today, we did invite them. We've been pursuing them since before Christmas to come on to this webinar because they are the regulators. They do, in effect, make sure that people do the right things at the right time. Unfortunately, it was just the end of last week when they decided that they were too busy and too under pressure to send someone today, but we will be writing to them with all the things that have been raised today. It is their role, and I think their role needs to be strengthened. We're not sure that the role that they undertake is particularly robust, and we may have some suggestions as to what we can help them with. So, but they were invited, and we will continue to invite them to anything else that we do on this. But unfortunately, that was their choice not to come. Okay, right, just want to kind of ramp things up a bit. We're close to closing. I'll just go through some of the comments we've had, and then I'm going to go to each of our panel and ask them the same question. Some of the comments on public services, I think, Helena, you said public services, there's a difference between public and commercial services. What we're finding is a lot of the public services are outsourced to private companies who also have shareholders. We want to look at how we can challenge the utility companies so that people don't have to go on the phone and if you haven't got a phone, it's possible to get through. I don't have a smartphone, I just have a pay-as-you-go phone. You end up pressing inordinate amounts of buttons and still not getting where you want to go, and that's why people give up. They don't get their questions answered. What happens where there's a website that you can go on that actually doesn't have the right information? It gives you frequently answered questions, which your question might not be there, but there's no access phone number or email that you can get into. The poor infrastructure on broadband, a major issue. And basically disabilities. We want to know what initiatives can be made towards voice activated technology being made available. And then obviously we want to also pursue the plug and play. So there are lots of stuff from people who are viewing this and listening in. If I haven't covered your question or scenario, I apologise, but we are a bit pressed for time. If it's a question and it can be answered, we will do so after. We can keep them, the questions, and we will answer. We've all got your details. So now the last question for panel members, right? Well, two questions actually. How can the MPC work with each of your organisations? What do you think we have to give that will help us and you in the work that you do? And can we look at what should be happening where people haven't got the money, haven't got the wherewithal? And there is a poll question to come up shortly after this. And how can we look at how we work together to make it possible for those people that really do want to go online and can't afford it to make that transition? But also, as important, is how do organisations like the MPC, who a good over 50% of our organisation is over 75, and it has been a struggle for us to keep them included, and particularly it's been mentioned on this webinar that those people are excluded, and how can we, work to make them make it more inclusive, right? So they're the two questions. I'll go to Helena first. Helena Herklotz first.
Thanks very much, Jan, and great session today. Lots to pick up. So I already have great contacts with the MPC in Wales and meet regularly, so we're already working on a number of issues together, and it's great to connect at the UK level as well. I think one of the things we can all do is think about, who's best to take particular issues forward, where particularly we need the strength of a membership organisation like NPC to make your voices heard. So I just look forward to continuing that really positive work. I think just a couple of things in conclusion for me, really. We've heard quite a bit today about how people are getting excluded, either because we're moving towards a cashless society or because of not being online. And we do really need to use the law, and we need to use the Human Rights Act as well. So both the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act. So if we can demonstrate that it is age discrimination, for example, because the majority of people who lose out are older people, then we have an opportunity to pursue that. And in terms of human rights arguments as well, I'm looking particularly at issues around human rights in terms of being able to be kept informed and communicated with, and therefore making sure that it's not just online that is used. So I'll very much be continuing to do that work. I'm very keen to connect with anyone who's been on this event today who wants to get in touch, and we'll keep you in touch with the work we'll be doing, particularly to ensure that you don't lose out if you're not online, to enable people to get online. And the couple of things I've been pushing for is a right to digital connectivity, so that we review digital infrastructure as an essential service that the whole population needs access to. So I'm pushing that with Welsh Government. And also, I think we need to introduce a social tariff for internet access to make it much more affordable, and actually then work towards the provision of free universal access to the internet. So those are the particular issues I'm pushing, and would welcome working with others to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. We'll go now to Helen Milner.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a really interesting morning, I think.
Afternoon,
whatever it was. So on your first question, I think that there's lots we can do together on the lobbying side. So I think that that's definitely something that we should pick up with you. Clearly we are on social media with hashtag Fix the Digital Divide. If anyone wants to put their views on social media, then please do so. I think though there's also definitely working together, and we're working with a number of different organisations, but I think also pushing forward on your own as well, because sometimes I think it's about plurality of voice. So if Rishi Sunak gets lots of different letters from lots of different kinds of organisations, then he'll know that this is something that he needs to take seriously, or Boris Johnson for that matter. I think that on affordability, personally, I think we should be pushing the government to rid our country of data poverty by in 2 years' time. I think a 2-year target would be good, and I think social tariffs are definitely part of the solution, but I think there are other parts of the solution as well. And I know from the people that we support that some people just still cannot afford anything. So a social tariff would go a huge way forward, particularly if it's easy. There's not too many hoops to jump through. Obviously, it'll be means tested, but there are people who just have nothing. You know, they can't afford £10 to top up their mobile phone with the pay-as-you-go. You know, so we really have to not just stick with a social tariff, although having more social tariffs would be good, and making sure that we also have some free offers as well. I'm going to have to jump off, but I've put a link to my slides in the chat panel for anybody who would like any of those URLs or any of those stats I mentioned earlier. But it's been a really great session, and I really look forward to working with all of you, and please do get in touch if you'd like anything.
Thank you, Helen. We put the slides and the recording of this session will be on our website this afternoon, so people can link to our website and get all the slides that have happened today. So thank you very much for your time. I know you're a very busy lady, and look forward to speaking to you again shortly. So thank you, Helen.
Everything. See you all later. Bye.
Bye. We go now to Jenny Haskey, and if Brian Ross Atkinson's still around.
Yeah.
The 2 questions, Jenny.
Yeah, I mean, I guess first of all, the fundamental point of digital inclusion is to ensure that people are not excluded. And we've heard a lot this morning about how, unfortunately, there are too many barriers. So whilst charities like ours, so Citizens Online, we're a very small charity, whilst we can continue to offer our support where needed, where possible, our public bodies and businesses need to step up to the plate. You know, so more programs that prevent people from being excluded. You know, but even something as simple as we look at the COVID track and trace. You have to have a smartphone. It has to be a current one, a modern one. So just how many people did that exclude? And that was pushing, you know, those people, as we've said, the absolute core demographic who are being forced to go shopping because they're not online, don't have the facilities to take part. So it's really, I think, where we can add value and work together is, like you say, adding that voice to people over 75. We need to take this a step forward. So we're really looking forward to working with you further to make sure that we're bridging that digital divide and well-being where possible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jenny. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, just following on from what Helen said before she left. I mean, Finland have committed to ensuring that every one of their citizens have a minimum of 1 meg of data. You know, we've left the EU and we're supposed to be better, so let's do better. Yeah. You know, let's get this BT Openreach program off the ground. Let's get these black spots in the country where people can't get any signal regardless, any kind of 4G or broadband. Let's get those areas sorted out. Let's get this nation connected, and let's start to really get people online. It is literally, I mean, we pay for SMS, but we used to pay for it, but we found out that it's a free service that doesn't cost any broadband, any carrier, anything. It's the same way that we can ensure that people have a minimum of connectivity. And regardless of whether or not it's means tested, if we're really going to take this nation into the future, we need to make sure that people have access to, or you can say 4 fundamentals: email, search facility, banking, being able to purchase online, and I don't know, look at a video or do a video call. you know, and you have your 1 meg of data or whatever it is that's renewed every month, you know, and that should be a service that used to be like, I'm old enough to remember when you didn't have to pay for water. And so, you know, things like that. It should be a national service that we offer. But I don't know, that may be too political.
No, that we're not politically aligned, but because we're a campaigning organisation, we're seen to be political, and you know, the small p rather than big P.
Yeah.
So we would challenge any government that is, you know, adversely making decisions that affect older people, not just the older people of today. I mean,
Yeah.
MPC just doesn't work for the pensioners of today. We're working for the pensioners of tomorrow, like yourself.
Yeah.
So what we gain or lose now, you will gain or lose in the future. So we're fighting hard against a government that shows us no opportunity to make anything better. But thank you so much, Ryan.
I think to pick up on your first point that you mentioned, Jen, was that there should be a minister or a department for this. It's beyond ridiculous. I mean, we are living longer, we're surviving more, and we are still, well, I say we, I'm not yet there. I'm coming up close. I just look young. Yeah, you know, that there is no real provision. I worked with Positive Aging in London, Pale, a number of years back, and it's the same thing, and it's really disheartening to see that these are prevalent issues even at a national level. So, you know, we're happy to partner with you and to
thank you so
help
much.
steer you and
And
this
if,
conversation.
you know, again, you know, Commissioner for Older People, if it's right for Wales and Northern Ireland, then it's right for England.
Just to quickly
It's not
jump in,
gonna be
actually,
easy.
whilst we've been talking this morning, some things just popped up from Brighton and Hove Citizens Advice. So somebody has got in touch with them to say, I can't afford broadband, so when my data runs out, I can't see my grandkids. Do you know how heartbreaking that is? So Citizens Advice this morning is saying 1 in 6 people are struggling to pay for their broadband. So they are also calling for a low cost tariff. So again, the more voices that we can add to this, then absolutely the better. But that, just like so, whilst we've been talking this morning, that's
that's good. That's really good. Thank you. Roger, the 2 questions.
Yeah, I think the first question, it's I think all the different groups that have been on today, it's sharing that information we have, isn't it, on areas of common interest. Information is power at the end of the day, isn't it? The more data and information got, the better we can use it to try and get where we go to. For individuals, just type into the chat there. There's information on our, I hate to say on our website, given the conversation today, but gmb.org.uk, just type in Safer Cash. There's a load of information on there. You'll have access to the letters to the Chancellor and surveys and things. So please use that. On the second question, I agree with everything that everybody said. However, I'd hate to put a dampener on things. We've just been through, or we're going through, a pandemic. There is a huge financial cost to the country for that. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that how that's going to be paid is through public services, and that's cuts in public services. So everything we're kind of asking for is a cost of the public service sector, where my real fear is that it's going to be less services, less information and less help, not the more that we need it. I think around the internet providers, that if they were legislated that they had to provide free broadband for anybody over such an age would be helpful, and maybe we'll get more traction there. But I think relying on government at the moment, or relying on the public sector for anything that has any kind of finance attached to it, then no, I'm not looking forward to the future in the public service sector. We know what happened with austerity. That's where it got hit. We're coming into this again. They will pay the price for COVID, unfortunately. So sorry to be the bringer of doom, but I think sometimes we have to realise the situation we're in and kind of plan around that, isn't it?
No, I think you're right to raise that. You know, it's always in the back of the mind. You know, what has happened, you know, over the last 11 months now has to be paid for. And there'll be lots of people out of work who can't afford even to keep their mobile phones going. And if you don't have a home phone, then you don't have a way of contacting people except by post or going to meet them, which you can't do at the moment. So at the end of the day, it is a cost to be paid for, but we have to be brave and we have to stand our ground. And I want, you know, while you're here, Roger, I want to thank GMB for all the support that they give NPC.
You're more than well. It's such an important organisation. That
really
voice is
fantastic.
needed.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, Genevieve has had to leave. She had a meeting at 1 o'clock. So that's it. And before we do our last webinar, I just want to give a shout out to our friends in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland are running a programme called Linking Generations NI, and that has been able to operate right through the pandemic. So thank you, Northern Ireland, for that. As always, doing great work over there for older people. So thank you. So Jonathan, can we go to our last webinar before we round up?
Okay, we've got 2 quick polls and we'll give you 30 seconds for each one. So the first is, should over 75s be offered free broadband and computer training? It's a yes, no, undecided. And we'll just give you a few more seconds on that. Okay, let's just end the poll there. Okay, so 94% of people have said yes to that, 6% undecided. And we'll just go on to the final poll, which is, should it be mandatory for banks, utility companies, and other businesses to maintain postal and telephone communications and cash check payment methods for older people? So we'll just give you 30 seconds on that, and we'll hand back to Jan in a few seconds. Okay, we'll end it there, and unsurprisingly, everyone agrees that those services should be maintained. So I'll hand it back to Jan for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's not surprising, I have to say. It's how we do it that is the issue. And from today, we've got such a lot of information that we will need to gather, collate, and think about our next moves. And don't be surprised if we contact you again fairly soon. It just remains for me to say thank you to lots and lots of people. First of all, our panel, which is Helena Hercots, and I know she's had to leave. She's had another meeting, but very informative. Helen Milner, who's also had to leave for another meeting. We'll be getting in touch with Helen, I'm sure, around the Good Things Foundation. Jenny and Brian, thank you so much. We would most definitely wish to work with you. I think it's absolutely great what you're doing in the communities that you're linked with. And I think it's so important, as you say, that human contact, that human element of approach to the work that you do. Roger, again, thank you for your time. I know you're a busy national officer. And as I said, just let us know what we can do to, ramp up the campaign. And I do feel that once we are free to go out into the fresh air and gather as groups, we'll be seeing you somewhere with our banners. And Genevieve obviously had to leave, but we will contact her to say thank you with that. The other thank yous are the members of our digital working party who've absolutely, since it's a very, very new working party that came together the end of 2019. So they've done a huge amount of work already, and obviously will be working on the next area of the campaign. So that's thanks to them. And it goes without saying, thank you to Bev, our campaigns officer, and Jonathan, our information officer, for making things so easy for me today. And hopefully everybody has enjoyed it. And as I say, everything will be on our website later this afternoon. So if you want to download slides and things like that, we will be doing a report. It will take some time to gather everything together, and with all the other things that we need to do as well. But we will do a report on what we see as the outcomes and where we need to go in the next stage. Okay, so thank you to everybody that's watching and listening and has participated in whatever way. As I say, very sorry if I haven't been able to cover your comments and questions. It's been a very busy thing on the chat and the question. I'm just getting used to that now. I just remember to look at it. Yeah, it's all new to us. Okay, so I want to say thank you. We will be in contact with you again. This is the first of, I guess, many things that will be happening on digital inclusion or exclusion. And it isn't just about the digital age and computers, it's about actually making businesses and other people aware of the damage that they cause when they remove, you know, a service from a community. And it's not just about older people, as we say. We know there are people out there who, because they are on low income or, you know, on universal credit, have to make sure that the cash they get every week lasts them the week. And the way they do that is to put things in different envelopes or different boxes, or as my mum used to have 3 purses, one for electricity, one for gas and one for food, you know, and that was it. And you know, that's what you had to spend. And I think that it's a great disservice to those people, as well as older people, to deny them the use of the only way that they can actually make sure that they control their money. And it is our money, and we should have control of it, not the banks and not the businesses. So once again, thank you to everybody. And I'm going to go now and have a nice cup of tea.